So, growing up as a more introverted type of guy, I've always said that if I had $1 for every time someone asked me, "Why are you so quiet?" or "Why don't you speak up more?" then I'd be a very rich man by now. I think for us introverts, because we are living in a world that does feel somewhat biased towards extroverts, it almost feels like we're taught to look at this part of ourselves as a limitation, as something that's going to hold us back in our career, in our social life, and just stop us from getting the things that we want in general. I remember when I was younger, I tried to be more like my extroverted friends, to be louder, to have more volume and more energy, but it always felt like I was putting on a different personality. It always felt kind of fake and it was just exhausting. But after 5 years of getting out of my comfort zone and actually growing a pretty decent social life from non existence, I can pretty confidently say that my introverted personality was never as big of a problem as I was making it out to be. And sure, I'm not going to be the loudest person in the room, and I don't actually think I'd want to be, but I'd actually say that I have a more exciting social life than a lot of those same extroverted friends do. But yeah, so now that I have a much deeper understanding of my introverted personality traits, I'm going to teach you 3 social hacks that I use every day as an introvert to appear more confident and likable without having to change my personality. So, the first social hack that I use constantly is to warm up before a big social outing. So, this is an idea that I absolutely love and most people don't seem to know about, but a bit like before how we would go and do exercise, we would warm up. We can actually make it easier for ourselves before going to some big social event where we're going to have to talk to a lot of people. We can actually do our own version of a warm up for that as well. So I've always said that if I've just been sitting at home all day, doing nothing, not talking to anyone, and you were to somehow magically teleport me into the middle of a party where the expectation is for me to start mingling with all these people who I might not know and just, have something actually to say to all these people, I'm going to find that pretty hard. And that is purely down to the fact that if you've not been talking to anyone all day, if you've kind of just been spending a lot of time on your own, it's actually much more normal to feel like that, to feel somewhat anxious, to kind of have to think a bit harder about what to say before you actually say it. Going from an environment where the social pressure is extremely low to immediately going to one where the social pressure is really high, that's always going to be kind of an adjustment. And that's why we need to warm up before we do so. So, how we can warm up for this is by going through a series of low stakes interactions that don't feel as scary before eventually going on to that more challenging environment. So let's say I'm going to a party. What I would usually do is, as I'm walking down to that party from my house, I would either call up my brother or one of my best friends, just anyone who I can quite easily talk to, just to kind of build up a little bit of, I'd almost describe it as like flow, just kind of get into the habit of talking to someone. And then usually for something like a party, because there's going to be lots of people we don't know there, I try and get in at least one interaction with a stranger. So what I might do is I just go down to the local shop. I'd buy something cheap like a packet of gum, mainly for the purpose of chatting to the shopkeeper when I'm at the counter. So I'd ask the shopkeeper 2 questions. I'd just say, "How was your day? And did you have any interesting customers?" And that's usually enough to just get like a little back and forth going, just a nice, easy conversation to start the night off with. So you can try either of those 2 things, but pretty much anything that gets you out of your head, that gets you speaking out loud, is going to be effective. But honestly, if you can speak to even one person before you arrive to that party, you're going to be twice as comfortable in that environment and half as anxious. So the second social hack for introverts is going to sound a little bit backwards. It's going to sound somewhat selfish, but hear me out. And it's actually putting yourself first in every conversation. So as introverts, we often follow this advice of, in order to be an interesting conversationalist, you have to show interest. So, what does that mean? So, in order to keep a conversation going with someone else, we should be polite and we should ask them lots of questions. We should show an interest in them and almost exclusively make the conversation about things they want to talk about. I actually don't know how widespread this advice is in real life, but this is pretty much what the book How to Win Friends and Influence People teaches you. Just kind of that everyone is their own favorite subject. So in order to get good at talking to people, we need to talk about them. And I tried this for probably about 3 months straight when I was at university. And more often than not, I would actually bump into people who, let's say a few nights ago, I'd been speaking to them for half an hour in this way, and they actually wouldn't remember who I was, even after I'd been speaking to them for that amount of time. And that's because this approach of putting everyone else's enjoyment ahead of our own actually does us a disservice, makes us come across as less of an individual. All of it comes at the expense of showing off who we are and our own personality, so we just don't come across as memorable. But I think the other problem I had with this was so many times in group conversations in particular, I'd want to get my thoughts out there. I'd want to kind of say something that I found funny, or, I want to make the group laugh. But every time, just as I was about to say it, my brain would just talk me out of it. I'd think, that's proper stupid what you're just about to say. You definitely shouldn't say that. So I'm freezing up and overthinking everything I'm about to say. When the people I'm with, they're saying the dumbest shit ever. Like, they're making the stupidest jokes. They're saying the most unintelligent things, and they just do not care. Yet I'm sat here just like overthinking the same joke 10 times over in my head. So a really good mindset that I found for overcoming this particular kind of social anxiety, it's an idea called self-amusement. And this might be a little bit hard to understand, but pretty much the mindset we need to adopt is that the world exists for my entertainment. The world exists to make me laugh. So instead of second guessing myself and whether other people like what's just come out of my mouth, I'm not going to take life too seriously. I'm going to learn to laugh at myself a bit more, because we all say stupid things. And most importantly, with every single conversation that I get into, I'm going to aim to have as much fun as I possibly can and make it as enjoyable as possible for me. So there's two ways we can practice this. So first of all, whenever we get a thought that we find entertaining or funny, no matter how random it is, it's just come to us in this moment, we're going to say it. We're not going to copy someone else's joke or repeat a line we've heard somewhere else. This needs to be fully unplanned and spontaneous, like it's just come to us right now. And we're just going to say it, and then we're not going to monitor other people's reactions. We're not focused on how they've received it. We're just saying it as a way of entertaining ourselves. And there's honestly like a million different ways you could do this. Like, I was thinking of a way to go over to this girl that I like the look of the other day. So I literally just went up to her without knowing what to say. And this just came to me. I said, "Excuse me, I just wanted to say you have amazing bone structure." And I'm like, I said it and I was like, where the fuck did that come from? But honestly, that's kind of a funny and unique compliment. And it went down surprisingly well. I think when we kind of lean into this like more playful, unserious energy, we can actually be like surprisingly witty. And I guess another example is I was on a night out the other week, and for some reason I just started putting on this traditional British boy accent, like this traditional private school boy accent, and I really got in character for some reason, and I just kept that accent up for like the next 20 minutes, purely because I found it funny. I was not looking for any kind of reaction. I just found it funny in that moment. And then the second thing we can do is ask questions that we genuinely want to know the answer to. So many of us ask these boring questions just out of politeness, and we don't actually care what the answer is. We don't care how someone's week has been. We're just saying it because we want to be polite. I was talking to this Mexican guy on one of my trips, and I don't even know how we got onto this subject, but we were talking about crimes. So then I just started asking about like gangs in Mexico, and somehow I got onto the subject of had he ever shot a gun before. And it sounds like such a juvenile question, but I asked him that because I genuinely wanted to know more. Like, there was a level of enthusiasm from my side. And I think he could sense that, and he was more than happy to kind of like play around with this conversation. And this guy actually ended up telling me that his uncle is like the chief of police in his town in Mexico. And he just like goes into the armory and lets this guy, his nephew, just like shoot all of the guns. And apparently he's fired a bazooka before. So honestly, one of the more memorable conversations I've had in my life recently just came from asking a pretty dumb question. So I can see some people calling this selfish because we're only talking about the things that we're interested in. But in my mind, I could not disagree more, because I think wherever in the world you go, people are drawn to the one who's having the most fun, to the one who who genuinely looks like he's secure in himself and he's just enjoying himself in the moment. Instead of just being some boring fuckwit who sticks to the safest topics and, is uncomfortable showing any of their own personality. We're being authentically us. And I think ultimately, when you're showing off your true personality to the world, it's much easier for the people who resonate with that to come and find you. And, anyone who doesn't, they're free to go their own way. And the third social hack, which is going to seem like a gross oversimplification, is just show up. So although I consider myself a pretty confident guy, I am still deeply introverted. And I don't ever think that's going to change. I know I'm not ever going to be the loudest guy in the room or fully comfortable being the center of attention. And I'm okay with that. But if I were to boil down all of the progress I've made in my social life in the last 5 years into just one rule or one habit, it would honestly be just a willingness to turn up to things and see what happens. So what exactly am I talking about? So things like hobby groups, sports, parties, any kind of event where I'm likely to meet people, I'm just going to make an effort to show up and see what ends up happening. Even if I have to go on my own, even if I go and only speak to one person, or I stay for 10 minutes before deciding that I hate it and I'm going to leave, I can still say I've made an effort to be social, to practice my social skills and get out of my comfort zone. So a few weeks ago, I went on my very first solo trip in Europe, and I was actually surprisingly nervous going in because I really was all on my own in this foreign country, staying in a hostel. So there's loads of people there who I've never met before. And I was feeling a lot of anxiety at the start of this trip. And I remember just spending like the first half an hour in my room, just doing nothing, kind of being a bit afraid to leave. And the entirety of the trip could have just been me hanging out on my own if I'd have stuck with that. But I still made an effort and I signed myself up to every single activity because the hostel was running these like group activities in the day and in the night. Went to every single one. And I kind of knew signing up to that if I did that, it'd be kind of inevitable for me to meet some really cool people. And because I made the effort, I came out of this trip with like a bunch of really good friends. So I've always said that making friends is a combination of the right place at the right time. So the time part you can't control, as in you can't control whether the people who you meet at this specific time are going to be the ones who you share interests with or a sense of humor with. But if you're consistently showing up to loads of social events and putting yourselves in those situations where you're likely to meet and talk to people, then the statistical odds of you meeting someone cool who you genuinely like are only going to go up. So it's all about putting yourself in the right place to allow that to happen. And the other benefit to this is that social skills are a muscle. So the more we get our reps in, the less anxiety we're going to be prone to and just the easier of a time we're going to have. So yeah, if there's one serious thing you take away from this video, let it be that. Just show up and see what happens.